I'll try and be brief, Chair. I support what's been said by the previous member who's concerned about equality impact assessments and how this has unintentional consequences that have not yet been addressed. And while nobody, the SNP or probably any other party, has any objection to the general principle of a public sector exit payment cap, I note this instrument before us here today, the concern about the waivers in the cases of unfair dismissal or health and safety related detriment. And the waiver process is concerning. But the SNP does not, and I certainly do not, support the statutory instrument, which is singularly unfair to those in the nuclear decommissioning industry. Now, we know those workers have suffered cuts to their pensions in the recent past, and this is a cause of profound concern to all those in that industry, not least in my own constituency of those employed in Hunterston in North Ayrshire and Arran. Now, some history, Mr Chair, if you'll give me a bit of latitude, some history here is actually very important. When the nuclear estate was privatised in the 1980s, guarantees were given by the Tory government under Margaret Thatcher. Guarantees were made requiring the new private sector employers to continue to provide pension benefits for those employed at the time of privatisation. And the phrase used at the time was, at least as good as those they were receiving in the public sector. Now, while we've had revisions of the pension arrangements of nuclear decommissioning workers on more than one occasion in fairly recent years, we know this commitment has been abandoned, and now there's the prospect of these exit cap payments. Now, the UK government has decided that because the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority is classified as public sector, these schemes fall under public sector arrangements, but clearly these pensions are not public sector pensions. Decommissioning sites are now in the private sector, and unlike for every other public sector worker, redundancy is an inherent part of their job. Now, the Minister seems to have said today, and he seems to have put it on the record, that all nuclear decommissioning workers will be exempted from the public sector exit payments cap. Now, we should have had sight of that commitment. If that is his commitment, if I've understood him correctly, we should have had that commitment long before now. And we should have had commitments and guarantees to employees of Magnox Ltd and others affected by the Enterprise Act 2016. Now, I know that Magnox is specifically mentioned in this document here. So, the way that I read this, the provisions on relaxing the cap contained within the regulations are not adequate, are not sufficient to give comfort to nuclear decommissioning workers that they are indeed exempted in the way that I know the Minister wishes that they want to be, and they should be. The regulations should be drawn specifically to exclude those workers in nuclear decommissioning. I would like to see more specificity on that. And it seems that because of that lack of specificity, we've been asked to agree on something here today in which there is a lack of clarity from what I can see. Now, we know that nuclear decommissioning workers, we know they do a very highly skilled job. We know their job is sometimes dangerous, but to be caught up after all the cuts to their pensions in recent years, again, in regards to attacks on their pensions on these public sector exit payment regulations, is not acceptable. And it is creating, as we speak, disincentives for people to work, to be recruited and indeed to stay in that industry. And it's extremely bad for morale. Now, nuclear decommissioning workers have contacted me, and I know will have contacted anybody who's got a nuclear plant in their constituency. They are concerned, and I'm sorry to say that when it comes to their pensions, they are right to be concerned, because it can be seen that the agreements that they thought they had with the UK government over several decades, it can be seen that those guarantees are not being honoured. And when I raised this with the Chief Secretary of the Treasury 2 years ago, I was told, and I quote, "It is necessary to have terms and conditions that reflect the modern situation that applies across the economy as a whole." How does that square with the cast iron guarantees made to these workers when the nuclear estate was privatised? They were not told that these cast iron guarantees were actually written on water. The problem is these workers are classed as public sector workers, but their terms and conditions are not devolved to the Scottish Parliament as they are for other public sector workers. Scottish nuclear workers still have their severance and early retirement terms dictated by the UK government. The goalposts have clearly been moved when it is deemed financially beneficial for the government or the industry, while the pension interests of the workers always seem to be a secondary consideration. And the Office for National Statistics has classed Magnox on this Magnox as a public sector organisation, despite the fact that they work on sites that have privatised. Now, draft guidance from the government uses the definition of a public authority contained in the Freedom of Information Act, which includes bodies specifically listed in schedules to the Acts, publicly owned companies and any other body designed as a public authority by the Secretary of State. Interestingly, Magnox is not listed in the schedules, and that is because it is privately and not publicly owned. Consequently, the Freedom of Information Act does not apply to Magnox, except where stipulated in employee contracts with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, and so neither do the IR35 reforms. So we have confusion and concern among nuclear decommissioning workers, and that continues, and it's not acceptable. So as we pontificate over these exit payment caps, I urge the Minister to remember that any changes, any further attacks on these workers is a betrayal of the guarantees that they have had. So we've been told today of waivers or exemptions. I'm not even quite sure what the Minister's suggesting. But Magnox's inclusion in Part 1 of these regulations makes anything that he says now equivocal. What we need is a clear statement. These measures will not impact on nuclear decommissioning workers. It's a simple ask, and it's a yes or no answer, Mr Chair, so I'm looking forward to the Minister giving me that yes or no answer. Thank you.